Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic lights. And I really wanna know if I'll ever figure out where the road goes. Even if I'm falling down, I will keep on searching for my highs. You can say I lost my mind, I will keep on holding my head high, even if the sky is falling down.
All right, and hello everyone. It is I was getting ready to say beautiful Thursday, but it's kind of gray and cloudy, but still we'll look for the glimmers in that. It's still pretty, it's not raining yet. So happy Thursday to everyone who is watching this live. If you're listening to this on the podcast platform, happy whatever day it is, wherever you're at this moment. Today, I am joined by fellow autism mama, Shannon, and I am not going to try to say your last name. I know you told me what it is, and I thought I had it, and I don't now. So you can tell everybody your last name.
It's Shannon Urquiola.
Okay. You know what? That was kind of my guess. I remember when you told me how to say it. This is how my brain works. I was like, oh, it reminds me of Urkel. Did you ever watch?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I'm sorry if that offends you, but that was how I my brain
how
to
remember
Listen, that.
I have had this last name for a very long time, and I always spell it. No one knows how to say it, so you're not alone.
All right. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad that makes me feel just a little bit better. Well, today we're going to talk about unplanned journeys and just transforming chaos into confidence. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, Shannon is also an autism mom. And for all of you autism parents out there or caregivers, you know firsthand that this journey into autism, nobody planned it. We didn't have like a sign-up sheet. It just kind of like, boom, you were there. And we've had to kind of figure it out along the way. And there's a lot that goes into that. And I know if you've listened to this show for a while, you've heard me do a few episodes here and there just on kind of my own journey and a few guests I've had on. But it is a journey and you're always learning. And my guy's 14 now, so we're in the teenage years, which is a whole other thing.
Good luck.
Yeah. So, and your son's older. I can't remember. You said he was in his 20s, right?
Yeah, he's 27 now.
Okay. So can you kind of share with us your personal journey kind of into this world? And I know your brand name, Not Your Average Autism Mom, kind of tells us a little bit kind of about your personality, which I love, first of all. I know when we talked for like a really long time.
We did.
And it really clicked.
Yeah. So Jordan was diagnosed 22 years ago. And I think, one of the most important things that I always tell people is, when Jordan was diagnosed 22 years ago, the numbers were 1 in 158. Now the number is 1 in 35. Yep. So the number's not going anywhere. It's only getting, more. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, I think there's, a lot more people that are seeking diagnoses and things like that. But when Jordan was diagnosed, I literally knew nothing about autism. I had never heard about autism. One of the things that I talk about is I was 28 when I had Jordan. So I had lots of friends who were already well on their motherhood journey when I had him, and still no one's life had been impacted by autism. So my family knew nothing. I knew nothing. And back then, I think we may have had dial-up internet, but the Google wasn't there. We didn't have all the resources that, thankfully are available today. And so I read books. Like I got every book that I could ever find. And I talk about often, I ended up picking up a book called Eating an Artichoke by an author named Echo Fling. And I literally felt like I was reading the story of my life. Like everything that I was going through at that time with Jordan, his motor skills were very delayed. He did not walk until he was 12 months. I mean, he didn't crawl until he was 12 months. He didn't walk until he was 18 months. And, it's funny. I think that I am thankful that he was my first, because my daughter, who came 2 years after him, she was running at 10 months.
Yeah.
So if I would have had her first, I think I would have been probably way more freaked out than I was. And so I knew that there were, there something was going on. But diagnoses back then, they were not, they didn't want to give diagnoses at a young age back then. Back then, I was just telling somebody the other day on another podcast that I did. Um, Back then, they said we don't like to give diagnoses until they're 9.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, I did get a diagnosis through a neuropsychologist when he was 5, but it was PDD NOS before that. And Jordan's biggest struggles have always been socially. He is, he struggles in social situations. He's 27 now. He's never had a real friend. I am his guardian and caregiver, so he will, be with me. That's the plan now. Who knows what that'll look like in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
I do tell people because one of the things that was really discouraging for me all the way was people telling me, pretty much once he's 18, like that's it. It's as good as it's going to get. And I tell people, Jordan has had more growth in his 20s than he ever did. Teenage years were hell. I'll just tell you, they were terrible, terrible. He had negative behaviors. School was a nightmare. Which, when he was in 3rd grade, I had been in the beauty industry for 20 years and traveled internationally and did lots of stuff. But I realized at that point that he was going to need more. He was going to need more of me, and I needed to be home. And so I got into educational advocacy because I knew if he was going to get what he needed in school to be successful, I needed to figure it out. I've been in so many meetings that I left, crying in the parking lot, not knowing what they were talking about. I have told a story that when he was first started kindergarten, like I had spent months worrying about him going to kindergarten, right? Thinking there's no way he's never going to make it. And they just pushed and pushed that they wanted him in a mainstream classroom. And you're talking 1 in 32 kids. And I'm like, there's no way. And literally within, I think it was the first day or the second day, they called me and said, we don't think that this is the right placement for him. Well, at that point, Maria, I had no idea what that meant. Like,
Yeah.
sending him away somewhere? Like, what does this mean? And so I really got into educational advocacy and learned everything that I could learn about special education so that he could get exactly what he needed to be successful. And I tell parents all the time, listen, if your child is going to need additional services in school, you have to understand special education. Unless
Absolutely.
you're going to homeschool, you have to understand it, because if you don't, they're not going to get what they need. And so that's kind of where, I got my start within advocacy and making sure, and with a last name like mine, trust me, everyone in the school and district knew who I was. So if my name showed up somewhere, they were like, oh no, here comes Shannon. But I mean, we ended up having a very good team, and he made it through school. But it wasn't easy.
No.
Teenage years, puberty, all that stuff that is not an easy time. And, I tell parents today, listen, just know that the challenges that you're going through are a season. And it's going to be something different in 3 months or 6 months. It never stays the same.
No, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people who aren't kind of boots on the ground in the autism world, like with their own child, or they're not a caregiver for a autistic individual, they've heard, little kind of snippets on, certain things that, are challenges in that world. But, I always like to talk about some of the things you don't really hear much about. And I started talking about this from my own journey, because my autistic child was my 5th out of 7. So by the time you have your 5th child, you think you have this parenting thing down. Like,
Right.
This is just, a down pat. I can do this blindfolded, and then it wasn't the same. And, to kind of add a little bit extra to that, my first 4 children were from my first marriage. My younger 3 are from my second marriage. So this was mine and my current husband's first child together. So that was also a challenge, is to say, okay, well, there's something different. And, of course, my husband was like, well, all kids are different. Well, yeah, all kids are different. So it was this challenge, right? And so you have that layer of challenge, and then you can have other siblings. Like, I don't know, how many years apart are your daughter and your son?
2. She's 2 years
Two.
younger.
So, and that's another thing I don't hear talked about a lot, are these siblings of the autistic individual, because obviously autism requires all the time, all the time. There's no scheduling or planning for that a lot of times. And there's challenges to that, jealousy
the whole
and
family,
resentment.
right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I always say that I can't imagine not having my son. He's taught me so much about life and the world and just people and myself. Like, I look at life differently because of him.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there aren't dark days, right? That doesn't mean there aren't days where it's a struggle. And, I do like to say that, because I don't like the whole glitters and rainbows thing, because it is
Life
very
is
much
50-50, right?
Absolutely.
That's what I tell people. Look, everything that I do in coaching and all the things, like, it's not about, positive thinking and quoting mantras and all of that. It's not about that, because you're going to have good and you're going to have really hard. And I think the sibling dynamic, it's interesting that you bring that up, because, I, through many of the years, their father and I divorced when they were just 3 and 5. So they were very young. And so I was a single parent for a long time. We co-parented together, but, they lived with me primarily. And so I had a lot of the things behind closed doors. And I remember, like, I never forced their relationship, right? That was one thing. Like, I always wanted to make sure that Madison had her own friends and created her own self outside of our house. And I think that was really important. And looking back now, like, she's told me, Mom, listen, there's a lot of dysfunctional families in the world. And I just want you to know that even though you and Dad divorced, like, I don't feel like I grew up in a dysfunctional family. And for me, that's huge, right? Because I felt like I failed day in and day out. But at 25, I have really seen, I think, because I didn't force that relationship, right? I didn't, he was part of our world. She was a softball player. And so we spent a lot of time at softball fields, and Jordan was in tow, but, he was never engaged in the activities. He never, watched her play, let's just say. And I think for that reason, as she's gotten older, they've spent a lot more time together in their 20s. Mm-hmm. And they are building a relationship. And it's amazing for me as mom to watch them engage and build a relationship.
That's awesome. Is your son's verbal, right?
He is.
I thought so.
He's not conversational.
Yeah.
I always say that. Yes, he's verbal. He can talk. He can tell me what he wants. If he could talk to one person for the rest of his life, it would be me.
Yeah.
He just as soon not talk to anyone else. But yeah, he can speak. He just doesn't. I was telling somebody the other day, still at 27, he would never come home and be like, Mom, you're never going to guess what happened today at program. The bus got hit on the way to eat lunch. Like, if that happened, I would never know unless somebody told me.
Yeah. Which that could be said for a lot of males out there anyway, because my son that is not on the spectrum is exactly like that. I have to rely on getting all the information from his girlfriend. So, I think that's sometimes just like a thing that happens with a lot of the boys. And it's funny just how different. I mean, kids are different. Like, all kids are different. And of course, within the spectrum, it's a spectrum for a reason. And it's funny just watching how my son has matured and grown, because if you would have asked me back when he was 4 or 5 or 6, what we would kind of be on a journey like now, it's not where we're at. He's luckily been able to really excel and add a lot of skills that he didn't. I mean, we were delayed, on them, but we've come a long way on a lot of those things. And it's been, it's been amazing to watch, actually, and given me kind of hope that, if me and my husband are no longer around, that at least on some level he would be able to care for himself. Because that's another thing that people don't talk about. What happens when mom and dad are no longer around? Those are things
that's a very hard subject.
It is.
So it's a very hard subject, and there are, I have been looking at. I actually went and toured a facility in South Georgia that is amazing. It's called Annandale Village, and it's
Mm.
for adults with special needs, and it's an incredible place. But many of these places are very, very expensive. And that's a huge barrier for families because, when you're paying a mortgage and, both of you are working and we're getting by. I mean, and I think that planning for something like that is so important. And we just had a guest in our membership who talked about planning for your special needs child. And I think, so many of us don't think about that. And we do, but it's not something that we want to bring to the forefront, right? Because we don't know the answer. We don't know what it's going to look like. And I like what you said. Like when he was 4 or 5, your life doesn't look now like you thought it would. And I think that's so important because I always tell families, listen, you don't know. You don't know what they're going to do. They're on their own timeline. They're going to gain their own strengths at their own timeline. I have people ask me all the time, do you think my child's going to be with me when he's 27? Well, he's 5. Like, we don't know.
Yeah, no idea.
Please don't think that your journey is going to be my journey because that's definitely not the case. There are plenty of children on the spectrum that grow up and go to college programs and have careers and things like that. So I think it's one of the things that I really preach to our moms is be present right now. Like, what do you need right now? What do they need right now? And worrying about the future isn't going to change it.
No, I agree. I mean, there's something to be said for planning some things, of course, like I mentioned earlier, just care or whatever would need to happen. But yeah, you can't get lost in that. And honestly, that was my gut feeling the whole time. Because whenever we had, him, whenever he started showing kind of some signs, I kept taking him to, doctors, how you do, like the whole thing for feels like. And finally we had like a name. And I'm not big on like over diagnosing, but I still wanted I needed like a focus. Like this is what we're dealing with. That way I can try to fill in what he needs. Because of course, as a parent, I loved him. I wanted the best for him. So I needed to figure out what are we dealing with here. So we finally had this name and it's like, okay. But unfortunately, a lot of the doctors I dealt with after that, it was very much, well, he'll never. And that just bothered me because I'm like sitting here, I'm like, he's 4.5. Like,
how can you say that now?
What he's never going to do ever, So, I mean, I love how you mentioned earlier about, teaching moms to be advocates for their child educationally, even medically, just advocates, right? Because you have to be, because I can tell you, that I can tell you just different times I've had to deal with them wanting to give him a communication device when he was younger, because he only said like 1 or 2 words and I wouldn't do it, because my thing was he says 1 or 2 words. So if I give him a communication, he doesn't want to talk to you. So if I give him a communication device, he is never going to talk to you, And I think it's little things like that, my own gut feelings as a mom, and maybe the next person, their gut feeling was like, I need to give this to him, but I think that's the beauty of it, is that we need to make sure that we're speaking up for what our child needs, because we're with them every single day. We know them better than anyone.
No one knows your child better than you. Trust that mama gut. That's what I say. And, like you're talking about the communication device, we have a mom in our membership whose son got a communication device, and his language is exploding.
That's awesome.
It's really taking off. And so again, it's try this, try that, try this, what's working, because what works for one of us isn't going to work for everyone.
No, not at all.
But you don't know unless you try.
And I think that's also the beauty of having kind of a group of people, because again, nobody understands the world of autism like another autism mom, because I can talk to some of my other friends who are moms, and I mean, they'll understand some things, but some things they'll never understand. It's a different language. And when I'm talking about autism, that's actually how I explain it to people, is that autistic individuals speak another language. And, I've spent 14 years now learning his language, and he spent 14 years learning my language, and we're at where we're at this moment. And I think that helped me understand it, that it wasn't something quote unquote wrong. It was just, he innately spoke the language of autism, and I didn't naturally. I had to learn it. And, that was a big thing. But I want to circle to just you because as moms, like we tend to put ourselves on the back burner anyway.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your journey was early on in the autism years, but I can use my imagination based on how mine was.
Yeah.
Where a shower was a
Crying in the
miracle.
closet,
Yeah.
sleeping with the pillow outside of his door because he didn't sleep.
Yeah.
Locks turned around. Our house was like Fort Knox still to this day. Everything is locked. I mean, he was a runner and he escaped, and
Oh yeah, we were there.
so that a lot of that, and I think that me personally during this time, and still to this day, I still find myself trying to protect him, right? Like just in different ways throughout life. And I did that all along. And I think that like I never felt comfortable sharing the things that were going on behind closed doors with people that didn't understand. Because the truth is, and I tell people this still to this day, when someone's life has not been impacted by autism, we can't expect them to understand.
No.
I mean, people, if their lives have not been impacted by it, and granted, 1 in 35 children are diagnosed now, so more people have been impacted by it on some level. But if they haven't, we can't expect them to understand. Because if Jordan didn't have autism, it's not like I'd be running out and finding out about autism. No, I wouldn't. And so that was a lot of mine. A lot of mine was, I hid a lot of stuff. I didn't talk about a lot of stuff that was happening. I had, the schools and the administrators and those people, they were looking to me for answers on how to help him. And I didn't have those answers.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm just mom. I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know why he finds the need to throw himself on the floor and scream and kick and tip over chairs. I don't know. He doesn't like it here. I
Yeah.
don't know. Like, I mean, literally. And it was because, he had really big emotions that he didn't know how to communicate. And, I think that one of the things that I realized with him through the years is, he is very sensory sensitive to different, fluorescent lighting is a big deal. Just having to take in all that information and filter out what's important and what's not is hard for him.
Well, and I know during that time, me personally, it was like my self-care was non-existent. Like you mentioned about sleep, my child needed an hour and he was like, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
This is great. I'm good. And me and my husband would tag team.
Yeah.
And because it was right, and I had other children, it was definitely like, I don't want to say dark times because I wouldn't change it, but it was hard. It was
Oh,
hard and put a strain on our marriage, put a strain on, the rest of the family unit relationship because we didn't go anywhere. There was no
yeah.
vacations. There was no nothing. We're just now in the last couple of years able to go and stay somewhere else overnight because before he had to be in his bed at bedtime. There was no other bed, no other bed. He had to be in his bed at bedtime, which is hard for people to understand. That's a hard thing. And it was hard for my other kids to understand. Well, how come we can't? Well, we can't
Sure.
because of Kate. We can't because of Kate, because it was just too hard. It
And
was too hard.
I was so lucky, like during those times, because I had a really great, our softball family was just tremendously helpful for me through so many of those years because they really, they would make sure Madison was getting to where she needed to be. They would make sure if I was there with Jordan that Madison was taken care of if she needed. So I had a big support system in that
That's
realm.
awesome.
But yeah, I didn't get a lot of sleep because he did not sleep. And that was always a big struggle for us. And when you have a child that has behavioral issues and they're not sleeping, I mean, it just makes it worse. Because look,
Yep.
when we're tired, we're cranky,
Yep.
and that's the truth. So we had a lot of sleep issues. We had a lot of sensory issues. So like, we had to cut the tags out of everything. You couldn't have tags. You had to get socks that didn't have lines on them because, that would drive him
Hmm.
crazy. Through his IEP at school, they had uniforms at the school that they went to, and I had to have on his IEP that he did not have to wear a collared shirt. So he would wear the same color, but he couldn't wear collars. They would just drive him crazy and distract him
Yeah.
from, learning. And as far as me, I mean, I think that, and I'll just be honest, like my childhood wasn't the greatest, to say the least. And so I was just very committed to being the best mom that I could be. And so, yes, I was totally focused on my children. And it wasn't until Jordan was about 14 or 15 that, I started working with a coach because that was when I realized that he was going to need to be with me forever.
Yeah.
And at that point in my life, I was a single mom. Dave and I were dating, my husband now, we were dating then, but when we started dating, I had told him, listen, I have no desire to like get in a relationship. I'm not going to do anything until my children graduate high school. And, that was, I think, I don't know, they were still young, right? There were still like 6 years probably that he had to hang around to wait. But that was just really important to me that I wanted to make sure that they knew that I was always choosing them and they were always going to be first. So, I probably, let things go. And at the point when Jordan was 14 or 15, when I realized that I was going to have to get guardianship and he was going to need to be with me forever, that's a really tough pill to swallow.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's not an easy one for anyone by any means. And of course, my thought process was, well, this is terrible. Like, who's ever going to choose us as a package deal, right? Like, we come together.
Yeah.
It's not just like, you're going to be a empty nester. That's never going to happen. And so I really, when I started, understanding that and learning coaching and how my thoughts were really impacting my life, it really made a huge difference.
Well, and I know it's easier said, kind of like coming out of like at this end of it now, but prioritizing your own well-being and your emotional well-being and trying to figure out, even if it's like literally 30 seconds to be able to just focus on yourself, it makes all the difference in the world. But it's hard to get in that space when you feel like you're just reacting all day long and you're barely keeping your head above water. And I ended up with a surprise pregnancy when Cade was about 4.5. So I ended up with a newborn. So I have a newborn and then a kid that's sleeping in an hour. And I was like a shell of a woman. I was like a shell. Right. And, it's looking back now, there was things
that what happened. You took time for yourself.
I did. And then I ended up with a baby. Exactly. I took enough time for that to happen. And bam, I got rewarded for it. I wouldn't change it. But shoot, in those moments, I mean, those were hard. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because I really needed somebody to come up to me and say, listen, 1 minute, even if they cry for a minute to make sure they're in a safe, but get to 1 minute, give yourself 1 minute. You can do 1 minute. Everybody can do 1 minute, even if you feel like you can't, because that literally would have given me something, because, it was rough because it's such a challenge. And, there's so much stress on you during this. There's so much stress just in life anyway, and parenting and marriage and bills and all the things. We all have our own stuff. So then you add that to it. And again, it's this unknown language that you're having to try to decipher all day long. And, that just adds to it. Do you have any strategies? Because I know obviously you've been on this journey for a long time and you work with moms all the time. Do you have any strategies or practices that you usually recommend to help reduce, stress and anxiety for, moms or dads or whoever that's parenting or the caregiver for these autistic kids?
Yeah. So the moms that I work with would tell you that I am a huge proponent of journaling. And I'm a huge proponent of you celebrating your successes, no matter how small they are.
Yeah.
Because it's important that your brain is focused on what is working and the things that are going good. So I'll tell them, listen, you can take 2 minutes at night, in the morning. Like, I'm a morning person.
Yeah,
so I get up at 5 a.m. and I have 2 hours and 45 minutes before anyone in my house gets up. So that's my time. That's my time. I have coffee, I journal, I plan, I get on the treadmill for 2 miles, and then I get Jordan. But by the time I get him up, I'm already I'm 2 hours into my day. So I'm good. And I think that's one of the things that I wish that I would have started when he was younger, because that has been just life changing for me and for my family. Like
Yeah.
I show up better for them. But I tell them, listen, I don't care if it's 2 minutes at night, in the morning, whenever you can do it. I want you to write down 3 reasons why you are a great mom. And that might mean that you decided to go through McDonald's drive-through and get your kids dinner.
Yeah.
Because, I think as moms, we should ourselves to death, right? I should have done this. I should have done that. All these things, and that's one of the worst things that you can do is talk about all the things that you should have done. Like, what did you do that was successful? And that's another thing that I talk about too, Maria, is have to, right? I have to cook dinner tonight. And I tell them, no, you're lying to yourself. Like, you don't have to. There's plenty of parents that don't. Yep. You don't have to keep your job so you can keep medical insurance. There's plenty of parents that don't. We have grandparents in our membership who are raising their grandchildren because mom and dad decided not to. So you always have a choice. So instead of saying you have to do that, because that sounds hard before you even start, just kind of reframe that and just say, you know what, I get to do this. There's probably plenty of moms out there that wish they had the opportunity to cook dinner for their family. And I do not like it. It is not my favorite thing to do. And I don't live in a place where we have, Instacart or Uber Eats or any of that. Like, we don't have deliveries. I live in the middle of nowhere.
I do too. I do too.
So no, I don't like to do it. But when I do it, I'm like, man, you are a good mom tonight. Look at you feeding your family.
Well, and I think that's a great thing for anybody out there, is because, and before I end up having, every single time I mention something about women, inevitably I have a message. Well, guys do that too. So yes, the guys too, yeah. if it affects you, but it's one of those things we're so hard on ourselves, and I find myself doing better at it, but I'm not immune to it. Scrolling, Instagram, and you're like, oh my gosh, look at their clean house, and I know what mine looks like at this moment, and I'm like, and
you can't compare. You can't compare. And even inside our private membership, I mean, we have moms that are doing amazing things. We have moms that are at different parts of their journey, and I always tell them, don't compare. Because what's working for them is not where your family is right now. You know what? No. On a Saturday, you're staying home. He's happy. You're happy. Don't think that you should be at the fall festival. That would be a complete nightmare for your child at this point.
Yeah. Right? No, absolutely. Well, and I think that's another thing. There's certain things I don't like. I don't like amusement parks. I'm not even autistic. I don't like amusement parks. And I was laughing earlier when you said fluorescent lights. I do not like fluorescent lights. I can't turn these off all the time. I'll sit here in the dark with no shame. Like, sometimes I question myself where I fall on the spectrum.
Somewhere. Girls are really good at masking. So maybe we've just done really good for all these years in masking some of our. I'll tell Jordan sometimes, he'll do something and I'll go, you get that for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, you get that for me. And
I want to go to your community, because you've mentioned a community a few times, and obviously supporting a community is imperative whenever you're going through something like this, but not a lot of people have it, especially in the early years. I didn't, much because, like what you were saying earlier, it's like, number one, how do you even reach out, and what would you even ask them to do? Like, what do you even ask them to do? Because you have no idea what your minute looks like, more or less a day.
Exactly. You don't know where you need help.
Absolutely. But there is this rise of, support groups and stuff that maybe they were in existence, whenever he was little, but I didn't know about them.
More new. I think that, obviously with social media and all those things, it's more new. I will tell you, when I decided to do this, I basically, Maria, I created what I wanted. I created what I wish that I would have had when I was raising Jordan. So, our private membership is, we basically have 3 different pillars that are inside. The first one is emotional support for mom's well-being. Like, I do a lot of coaching on thought work and managing your mind in the midst of chaos. Like sometimes you just have to throw your hands up and be like, you know what? Yeah, this sucks. And this is chaos. And this is where we are right now. Don't resist it. Don't think it's not happening. Yes, he's in the middle of the parking lot screaming and you're having to pick him up and drag him to the car. I mean, you're not going to have a good thought about that. It doesn't make you happy. So I do a lot of work with them on that. And I coach on everything from, marriages to relationships to, all kinds of different things. And then the second pillar is special education. Because again, I know that parents need to know and understand special education. So we have everything inside that a parent would ever need to know on special education. And we do a lot of live events too. So we have an education Q&A every month where they can come on and ask their own individual questions. And then the community piece is what I needed. And these moms that are in our community are my village. Yeah. And they are literally they help me as much as I help them. Like, because I have a place now, right? I have a place to go on and be like, y'all, today was really hard. Yeah. They have that place. And, maybe they need, it was just a really great day and they need somebody to, tell them how awesome they are, or maybe it was a really hard day and they need to tell us. Like, and the difference is, there's a lot of groups out there, right? There's a lot of groups, there's a lot of things like that. The difference in our private membership is that we all know each other because we spend a lot of time together. So we know their kids. Like, even though it's virtually, like we know each other better than some people in our everyday lives.
Yeah. Well,
and that's the difference.
Well, and to be able to connect to that level, I think you do feel that you're able to open up a little more. And sometimes I think it's easier too, to at least at the first connection, to connect with someone that doesn't already have their preconceived notion on whatever you should or shouldn't be doing. Because I know that was a challenge with me too, with just family members, was the resistance to accepting that his diagnosis was his diagnosis. I think it's just, I don't think that's what it is. I think it's, and well, it is, and it's frustrating to have to keep re-explaining yourself. So, I mean, I can see it being a benefit to connect with people that maybe at first you don't know them. And, it's a fresh perspective, and then you're able to kind of grow together without those preconceived notions and accidental biases, what I always say, because we all have them. We don't realize we have them. We all have them with people we know. So, I mean, I think I can see that. And just to have people that you're able to, like you said, share your tough days, share your small wins and victories. And sometimes they're small, because I can remember the first time, and like I said, this was just a couple of years ago, but the first time that we were able to actually go on a family vacation, I was like, it was so huge. It was so huge because I was terrified.
For you to go and, it's kind of like, so we have a member whose son, is 11 and he just started riding a bike. Well, if she goes and puts that on her public page, people are going to be like, what? Like, she's 11, he's just riding a bike. And we're like, yay, way to go. That's awesome, So we normalize this.
They all have their own timeline, which all kids have their own timeline anyway, but typically, obviously, with autism, it's delayed from what is, typical. And I think that's a huge thing. I do want to ask you, as far as, connecting with the group, and I know you mentioned private, do you have a public page and then like where they can join private, or how does that work?
Yeah, we actually have a public Not Your Average Autism Mom page. And then we also have a group that is the Not Your Average Autism Mom movement, which is a group, but that's not the private membership. The private membership, we only open 3 to 4 times a year. We're actually going to be opening November 2nd for 5 days. We only open it for 5 days, 3 or 4 times a year. And that's because, again, I don't want to keep it open all the time because I want to get you in. I want you to get to know us. I want to get to know you. And look, we have a lot of members that are maybe not on social media. we have a lot of members that they haven't come out of their shell yet. Takes them a little longer sometimes, so they might be lurking in the background. But I can assure you that these moms that have been even lurking in the background for a year or two, they know all of us. They feel like they know all of us and our kids. And so the private membership, like I said, it only opens up 3 or 4 times a year, and it is $44 a month. And so it's $11 a week. And when I did it, I really wanted to make sure that it was affordable for most families. And we did that. And I will tell you, I way over deliver. They get way more than $11 a week, because anyone that knows anything about special education training, about coaching, all of that is very expensive.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, they have all of those resources inside the membership.
Now, as far as kind of navigating this journey, I know I titled this kind of Unplanned Journeys. What would you suggest, I guess, for people that are just embarking on this unplanned journey? Maybe they have a diagnosis, maybe they're suspecting a diagnosis, but that seems a very large thing, transforming that chaos into confidence at that very moment. Where would you suggest they start?
Yeah, I think that, and I talk a lot about early intervention, because early intervention is, I mean, it is so very important for children. And I know that as a mom, as a dad, if you're seeing delays, if you're seeing things that are different, things aren't, you know, you're concerned, I know you're scared, right? You're scared. And honestly, you don't want to know. You want to say, he's going to grow up. He's going to start talking. Whatever. All those things that, you know, because every child develops in their own timeline. So you're scared and you don't want to know, because no one wants to have a child that's going to need additional help, right? With anything. But I do say, go get the evaluation. If you suspect that your child has a deficit of any kind, there's no downside to getting an evaluation. Like you might get the evaluation and they come back and say, you know what, he needs a little bit of speech therapy to catch up, but nothing else. Or they may come back and say, yes, we believe that he's on the spectrum or she's on the spectrum. But once that happens, then guess what? You can start early intervention, because the whole goal is to bridge the gap, right? We always want to bridge the gap between where they are and where they should be. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bridge that gap. And so the earlier you can get them the intervention and the help they need, the more successful they will be in the long run. And I always say, if they can get interventions at 5, maybe by the time they transition from elementary school to middle school, they don't need those supports because you've given them to them. So that's my biggest piece of advice, is if you think that your child, if you suspect that there's anything delayed, just schedule the evaluations. And here's the thing. Most places are 6 months to 3 years to get an appointment to get an evaluation. Unfortunately, that's just what it is. You're not going to be able to wait and in 3 months decide, well, now I think I want to do it, and call and get an appointment next week. It doesn't work like that.
No, absolutely. Well, and I think a lot of people don't realize that the information is actually empowering. It was for me. I wanted the information. Like, that's my personality anyway, but I wanted the information, because then I had, the ability to figure out, well, how do I, give his brain the best chance that it has to get, like you said, to bridge that gap. Because that it's not about, because I heard somebody say this one time, well, there's no cure for autism, so what's the point of that? Well, it's not about curing anything. It's about, like you mentioned, giving them the support that they need, and also giving you as the parent the support that you need, because it is a hard journey, especially if you've never experienced it before, boots on the ground. If you didn't grow up in a household that also had an autistic individual or something, it's a whole different experience. And it's definitely not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. And having a support system can make all the difference in the world. I'll make sure that the links for your group and stuff are in the show notes.
Okay.
So this, if you're listening to this right now on the podcast platform, if you scroll down to the show notes, the link will be there. And I'll make sure for the people who find this live, you'll be able to find the links for this as well. But I've really enjoyed having you on today. Like I said, I feel like we can talk for a long time.
We just kind of connected.
We did.
Yeah. So that was good. I would just like to say, one of the things that that I deal with a lot is, acceptance is huge along this journey. And like what you were just saying, like you wanted that answer, right? Like you wanted that answer. And one of the things that I talk about is once I knew that Jordan was on the spectrum, I'm not one of those people. The why never mattered to me, right? Like I wasn't one of those people that dove into the why. My whole thing was just like you, Maria. I said, okay, now what, right? Like now what can we do to help make him live a productive, successful life?
Absolutely. Well, and I am the very curious child that always asks why. But in this case, I agree. And that's the way that I have approached that too, because it was already what it was. And so no amount of digging backwards would help him going forward. So my effort was going forward. And, there was different things that I tapped into. I always say when you don't know what to do, you do what you know. So a lot of moms that I've met also, we tap into the things that we do know. Maybe you're an educator and you start, going that way. For me, I was in the world of nutrition. So I started tackling it from that way, because when you don't have any idea what to do, you tap into the things that you are familiar with first. And
I'm excited because, and I don't even think that I've told my members yet, but Maria's going to be our guest host in November, and she's going to be talking all about autism, nutrition, and things like that. So that's going to be super exciting. I know they'll be excited.
Yeah, I'm excited about it as well. I love being able to kind of share our journey with that, because I do think it's helped him. We know that old adage, we've heard it forever, you are what you eat. And so there has to be some truth to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's been something that, I've kind of enjoyed sharing with people. But again, thank you so much for coming on here and hearing your story, and, it really kind of brought back some memories with me, and it makes me feel not alone. And I know for listeners that are listening right now that have a child on the spectrum, or maybe you're waiting on the diagnosis, it's important to connect with somebody who does understand your journey, because then it makes you feel not so alone. And I think it's one of the reasons that we connected right away, is because autism moms, we can see each other in a crowd.
Exactly. Hey.
Yeah. You've been there.
We are going to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as always, thank you so much for listening to Successfully Chaotic. We're here to inspire your journey from chaos to clarity. And if you're not already a subscriber, if you would just hit that subscribe button, we would really appreciate it. And again, Shannon, thanks so much for coming on today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic lights.